Hey everybody, this is Brendan here with Common Motor. It's common-motor.com on the internet, and today we're going to show you how to do a cam chain adjustment as well as a valve adjustment on this CB175. This is also going to apply to CL175s and SL175s as well as CB and CL200s, so stay tuned. On this 175, we're going to do a cam chain adjustment and a valve adjustment. And this is kind of the second part of what we call the standard tune-up process on these bikes. And this is done every 1,500 miles. And I know that sounds short, but in bike terms, it's actually a good bit of distance. Now the first thing in the process is actually oil change and filter clean. And then we do the cam chain and valve adjustments. And the last thing we're going to do is the ignition timing. But we have to do the cam chain and valves first because they have a domino effect on the ignition timing. So that's what we're going to jump into and show you how to do the process yourself. Now that we have the spark plugs out of the engine, the tappet covers off, and of course the rotor cover off, we're ready to do our cam chain adjustment and a valve adjustment. Now this is your first time to do this adjustment. There's something important to understand about the architecture of this engine. Honda made a lot of different two-cylinder, four-stroke engines during the 60s and 70s, and the 175 is one of those bikes. However, the main thing that's important about the 175 and 200 has to do with its crankshaft arrangement. And it differs from the other more common twins, the 350s, the 360s, and 450s in how the crankshaft is built. 175 and 200 use what's called a 360-degree crankshaft. As opposed to the other engines, they use a 180-degree crankshaft. Now, the reason this is important has to do with when we approach the adjustments on this engine, how we do the adjustments and how to determine what stroke we're on and what position we are when we make those adjustments. So that's kind of the key idea to know. Let's explain a little bit more about that crankshaft here. In a nutshell, what a 360-degree crankshaft means is both pistons are going to be up at the same time and down at the same time. And they're always in this level of travel. And every 360 degrees, they alternate what stroke they're on, meaning that if, let's say this piston's on the compression stroke, the opposite piston is on its exhaust stroke. Engine rotates 360 degrees, and now this is on the compression stroke and this is on the exhaust stroke and vice versa. And it always does that. A 180-degree crankshaft engine is a bit different, meaning that the pistons are always doing this, opposite positions of each other, regardless of where the engine's spinning. So it has to do with, we don't want to go into all the details of like why they did that. There's a whole engineering thing about why Honda did it, but it's important to know 175 200s, 360-degree crankshaft, which makes the adjustment process a little bit different from the other Honda twins. Before we actually start the adjustment on the valves and the cam chain, we have to understand what's happening here on the rotor under the stator cover here. And let me point out a few elements to you. First thing that's most important is the index mark. Now, this is the reference mark in which we are going to make all adjustments to. So as the engine rotates, different events happen at the index mark. Now our crankshaft moves in a counterclockwise direction as indicated by this arrow here on the rotor, and you should always turn the engine only that direction. A couple other marks, we have an F mark with a line and a T mark with the line, really close to each other. The F mark indicates fire for the ignition timing, and the T indicates top dead center, which is the location we're going to do the valve adjustment in. There is a mark that's not on the rotor, which we're going to make our own version of, and it's going to be the indicator mark for where to do the cam chain adjustment. So according to Honda, there isn't actually a specific spot that they want us to do the cam chain adjustment in as compared to some of the other engines. And the 175 manual, it just says to make the adjustment wherever. On the 200 manual, it actually tells you to do it while the engine's running, which is a little kooky to me, but I guess it's possible. But if your engine's not running, how do you know where to set it? And what we're gonna do is we're gonna set it 90 degrees past the T mark on the rotor. And what that does is it puts 3 of the 4 valves into kind of a relaxed mode. The valve springs are not compressed. And so we're gonna make our own mark in order to know where that is every single time. I'm gonna take my rotor and I'm gonna turn it where that T mark is kind of right in the middle of that coil, right there. And then I'm gonna go 90 degrees from that, which is gonna be pretty much kind of in line with the center of that bolt there. You could actually use something like a square here and line up into the middle of the bolt on the mark there. It's about 90 degrees right there. So it's gonna be close enough for what we need to do. So I'm gonna go with it probably right about here where that little magnet dot is. I'm gonna make a punch. Just a little mark right there. So I know when I set my cam chain, it's gonna be in the same position every single time. Turn the crankshaft until my little mark I made lines up with our index mark right there. The cam chain adjuster is located on the front side of the engine in between the exhaust pipes. So this is our cam chain adjuster right here. It's this bolt with this nut, this jam nut in place. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna back off the jam nut and then we're gonna back off the bolt. There's a spring in here and we're releasing the spring to take up the slack in the cam chain. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a 10 mil. I'm just gonna break that jam nut loose. Feels good. I'm just gonna back it off all the way so it's not touching. And then I'm gonna take an 8 mil. Gonna enter this with 8 mil and loosen it up here. Broke it loose there. And I'm just gonna back it up a few turns like that. And that releases the spring. And that's all there is to it. And then we're gonna go ahead and put it back. So I'll thread it back up. Until I feel it touch. I'm gonna snug it down just a little bit, not crazy. Don't wanna over tighten it or break the bolt there for over tightening it. It just needs to be snug. I'm gonna bring down my jam nut. Same thing, 10 mil, just snug it up. Okay, and that's it. Cam chain's adjusted. Now we're ready to adjust the valves. When we approach adjusting the valves, we're gonna approach it from a left side and right side of the engine. And we're gonna start on the left side of the engine because it's kind of the reference side for a lot of things on these bikes. And we do need to turn the engine to a very specific position. And it's gonna be on the compression stroke on this left cylinder. So we gotta figure out the compression stroke. And it's kind of an easy way to do it. I'm gonna end up turning my rotor here counterclockwise. At the same time, I'm gonna put my finger with a spark plug hole. And I'm gonna try to find which location, when the T mark lines up here on my index mark and I feel pressure on my finger, I'm a compression stroke. If I don't feel pressure on my finger, it tells me I'm on the exhaust stroke on this cylinder and the compression stroke on the opposite side. So I gotta rotate the engine another 360 degrees to find that place. Let's just do it and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm gonna turn the engine over and put my finger, in this case, put my thumb over the spark plug hole. I'm gonna feel for pressure on my finger. I can feel it right now. Yeah. So I was feeling pressure on my finger there, which tells me I'm on the compression stroke. Our engine's in position. We're at top dead center now on this left cylinder. Now we're ready to make the adjustment. We're gonna need a set of feeler gauges to do this, 8mm wrench, and this special tool here. This is a tappet adjuster wrench for these square drives that are on top of the valve adjusters. We got it on the website, link will be below, but you definitely need this wrench to make life a lot easier when doing the adjustment. The valve clearance on the 175 and the 200 engines is 2/1000 of an inch, or 0.05 millimeters, and 2/1000 is actually 0.002 of an inch. It's pretty thin. I actually have a gauge right here. So it's a fairly thin clearance. I do something I call the overshoot method. And what the overshoot method is I use the next size up feeler gauge. In this case, I'm gonna use a 3/1000 feeler gauge, or 0.08 millimeters. And the reason I like to do that is because it's much easier to set a tight value on a larger gauge than it is to try to get a perfect value on the exact same size. So a tight 3 and a loose 2 are pretty close as far as these engines are concerned. And when it comes to valves, I always like to err on the loose side so you don't break anything. Now, tight valve adjustments break parts, loose valve adjustments can just make noise. So again, always erring on the loose sides is good rule of thumb when you're making a valve adjustment. So I'm gonna use my 3/1000 feeler gauge for this. And I also like to take the feeler gauges out of the holder so I can actually feel with my tips of my fingers the proper amount of drag during the adjustments. This is our intake valve here. I'm gonna go ahead and get it loosened up. First thing I'm gonna do is use my 8mm box wrench to break that valve adjuster loose, and it is tight. Man, someone tighten that down good. Someone really bear down on that. All right, I'm gonna back that out. The nut right there. And you can see the screw is this square-shaped screw up here, and that's where our little square-shaped wrench here is used for making the adjustment. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna just back it off a little bit. I usually do it with my fingers when they're loose, like this. And then I'm gonna take my feeler gauge here, and I'm gonna get my feeler gauge in between the tip of the rocker arm and the top of the valve. You can see it slip right in there like that. That's where the gauge goes. Pop that out there, so we can weasel it in there. Just like that. And now I'm gonna bring down the adjuster screw till I just feel it get tight on valve adjuster here. Yeah, that's tight. Like I'm really pinching down on it right there. And if I try to grab the feeler gauge, it's stuck in there. So let me find the spot where it just wants to kind of slide out. Too tight. That magic spot where it's just cause some drag there. Remember, we're kind of doing this overshoot method, so you can be a little bit tight. All right, that's pretty good. It's got some drag on it there. Yeah, it's going to be somewhere in that ballpark. And it's a feel thing right there. Cool. I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna bring down this adjuster screw so I just feel it touch. Now comes the the fun part. I have to tighten the nut down against the rocker arm body, but not let this center screw turn at the same time. So I'm gonna get my wrench on there, hold that, and then I have to actually get this on top of the screw there. So I'm gonna hold the center in place, and then I'm gonna tighten that bottom one. In fact, I'm gonna and that's the adjustment there. And if you can't pull it out, it's too tight, and if it's really floppy going on, it's too loose. So that's good. I can actually wiggle it back and forth on the rocker shaft, and that's good. All right, that adjustment is done. We're gonna go over here to the exhaust side and do the same thing. See how I'm gonna back the nut off. Well, I'm gonna back the nut, but keep the adjuster position. That's kind of loose. Let's go ahead and get our feeler gauge in here. Let's see if we can bring it down by hand first. A lot of times it's easier to use your fingers than the wrench. So we can find the spot where it just touches. there. Feel it tighten up. Back it off around there. Let's feel our gauge. It's a little tight, see I can't quite wiggle it. Let's back it off a little more. It's kind of better. Might go a hair more. Tight. Let's call it quits there. Bring that nut down. Let it down. That, and that feels good. I got a little bit of drag on the rocker arm there, and that should be plenty tight. All right, we're going to rotate the engine now 360 degrees from where we were. One at the T mark. There, and now we can go adjust the right side. Well, that's going to wrap up the cam chain adjustment and the valve adjustment on this CB175. It's important to remember that these adjustments, whether it's the CB175, CL, SL 175, or the 200s, CB and CL, this adjustment has to be done every 1,500 miles. It also should be done in conjunction with an oil change and a filter clean and ignition timing, which we're going to get into in our next video. It is imperative that we got the cam chain and valves adjusted now so we can do the ignition timing later, because it is a domino effect how the parts work in the engine together. One affects the other, so that's the sequence. Cam chain, valve adjustment, and then ignition timing. As always, this is Brendan with Common Motor, common-motor.com on the internet. Thank you all for watching. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Subscribe to our newsletter via our website, and of course, down below, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and we will see you next time.